Welcome to EPG Pathshala on the course of History and Ideologies of Social Work. My name is Murli Desai. I'm a former professor of Tata Institute of Social Sciences. Today's topic from this course is Western Ideologies in the Modern Period. As you have gone through the course so far, we have started with the Western ideologies, and you have already looked at the Western Judeo-Christian ideologies and secular humanism and Protestantism that brought about changes during Renaissance. What we will see today is how the modern period brought about a whole range of newer ideologies. At that time they were new, but today they are called classical ideologies. And specifically today we will see the ideologies of rationalism and scientism, liberalism and democracy, capitalism and industrialization. Okay, the Renaissance spread secular humanism. It freed ideology from its ties to medieval Christian religion. If you have gone through in details what we did in that particular module last time, was that it was also considered a dark age because there was no freedom, there was no progress, society was stagnating, religion was getting more and more irrational and dominant, and so on. The Renaissance brought wide-reaching changes into all this. Okay, it started with freedom in a small town of Florence in Italy, and how it spread and what all it brought about. Briefly, what is relevant for us is to understand the beginning of the modern period based on secular humanism is the main ideology of rationalism. Okay, it arose as a philosophic outlook in the 1600s, launching of the modern era of the West. And it is also called the age of reason or enlightenment. In brief, to give you an overview of these modern ideologies that we will look at over three classes, three modules, is rationalism and how it led to scientism, liberalism, democracy, and together with capitalism, how it changed the mode of production of society to industrialization. Next set of ideologies of nationalism and social Darwinism will help us understand this whole significant part of relatively recent history of colonization and the spread of capitalistic paradigm all over the world. The third set of ideologies that we will look at are socialism, which are separated out from the previous because socialism tried to counter the exploitative ideologies of liberalism, social Darwinism, etc. And the policy of welfare that also tried to bring about some form of relief to those who are losing out in this unequal social structure. These ideologies are so important to understand for social work students because social work profession emerged in the context of these ideologies. Okay. Rationalism, we can understand by understanding, again, as I said earlier, how there was a gradual shift from religious sensibilities to scientific objectivity. Till now, it was considered that it's only God, it's only religion, it's only the priest, it's only the church that can determine your life, that can determine your choices or your future. Now, with secular humanism, the idea came that no, human beings are the source of freedom. Human beings are the source of choice. Human beings should take charge of their lives and not be subservient to these unequal systems. Now, what is the source? How do human beings take charge of their lives? Rationalism provided that source because rationalism said that if you go systematically, logically, if you develop knowledge about yourself, about your society, about the environment, that empowers you. That knowledge will empower you. So rationalism brought about that perception of the society that everything that's going on is a rational system, is based on certain reasonings, based on certain theories, based on certain laws of nature. And this whole way of understanding your environment was contradictory to the way the religion was explaining the society, why there is this life and so on and so forth. So rationalism became an alternative to source of human reasoning through critical inquiry. This gave human beings the capacity to take charge of their own lives and fashion their own destinies. However, as this ideology moved further, what it led to was science. What it led to was also scientism. Now, how is scientism different from science? As we saw earlier, scientism as an ideology, it again becomes very emotional, very, kind of inevitable. So when science led to scientism, the belief that scientific method is the only way, the only objective means of establishing the truth, also had its implications. Science made remarkable advances, no doubt. It also provided a whole system of knowledge, technology, which later on led to industrialization. But this view of society, of knowledge, also marginalized the whole set of people who had community-based knowledge, which was not based on the scientific methods. The truth based on scientific methods, which were observable and measurable, assumed a god-like supremacy. Similar to God, where you can, or religion, where you can't contradict, where you can't not believe, science took that kind of a status. That if it's scientific, it has to be true. If it is not scientific, then it is not true. What therefore happened was this whole thing of objectivity led to separation of values from facts. You could do a scientific method and the findings will be scientific and findings will be truthful. They need not have values. For example, there was a study done on brains of blacks and whites, and the outcome was, the finding, observable, measurable finding was that the brains of the whites were bigger than those of the blacks. So scientifically proved that white race is superior to black race. Okay, this is how a very good example of how values were separated from objectivity, okay, from facts, and as though they are independent. To be objective, you should not go by the values. Rationalism thus became a form of cultural imperialism that undermined the faith-based belief systems of the non-Western nature and modes of understanding. Again, one example here is the whole environmental consciousness that the tribal people have had over the centuries are today considered so valuable to preserve the environment. But not long ago, they were considered unscientific. They were not given any importance, and they were considered just superstitions. When the tribals worshipped trees, for example, they were considered superstitions. But those very trees today we find are so important for sustainable environment, sustainable development, because how it helps humanity, birds, animals, and the air and water and so on. So this is the implication of rationalism in terms of its contributions as well as its limitations. Let's move on to liberalism and democracy. Now, the power of reason that gave human beings the capacity to take charge of their own lives and fashion their own destinies gradually moved to liberalism, which basically means freedom, and democracy, which means that I will decide how I'll be ruled, or rather people's rule, or people's representatives rule. Okay. Now we saw earlier that the production process changed from agricultural to industrial, and the labor was needed, which was tied to the land as serfs in the feudal system. The new middle class of bankers, traders, manufacturers that were emerging at that point of time needed to challenge the power of the feudal lords, of the kings, and of the church. How this led to these revolutions in England, USA, and France. For example, in England, the revolution of 1688 established the supremacy of the British Parliament and implying that the final authority in political matters belonged to the people and not the royalty for the first time. War also broke down between the North American colonists and the British government in 1775 that resulted in the American independence and Declaration of Rights in 1781. Third, the French Revolution with the slogan of liberty, fraternity and equality resulted in the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen of 1789. These revolutions brought about major changes, not only in Europe and the Western countries, but all over the world, with reference to what the middle class wants. We cannot say these revolutions were of the serfs. We cannot say these revolutions were of the laborers. No, this was not the poverty group. This was a middle class which wanted more power, which was middle class that challenged the power by the feudal lords, the church, and the monarchies, and brought about the concepts of rights for the first time. And how it changed, we'll see later what implications it has. These revolutions broke down feudalism and limited kings' powers in Europe. Monarchy has not yet gone out of Europe, but the king's powers are limited. And ideologies of liberalism and democracy and the growth of a market or capitalist society emerged. We'll see how. Okay, what is liberalism? Liberalism developed as an ideology that sought to develop a system of fundamental right for freedom. And freedom for what? Freedom to hold private property, not subject to invasion by the state. These were aspirations of the middle class, right? Who had property but did not have right over the property. Or they were being regulated by others, by the systems, by the dominant systems. So they wanted this freedom of private property. Liberalism is today the most dominant ideology. Since its emergence during the revolutions till today, you'll find this has pervaded throughout the world in all the systems. Let's see. But these are the basic core aspects. What are the values of liberalism? These are very important to understand. How individualism, freedom, equality of opportunity and meritocracy are important dimensions of liberalism. Let's take individualism first. It is a belief in the supreme importance of the individual over any social group or collective body. Okay? It is I who will decide what I want to do, not my family, not my community. We saw historically communities played a very important role. We saw how families then were playing very dominant role in individuals' lives. Liberalism brought about this thought of I, me, and I want this. And this may not be same as what my other family members or my community members want. Freedom, individual freedom is a unifying principle within the liberal act. The whole literal meaning of the word liberalism emphasizes freedom. Okay, equality of opportunity. Each individual should have an equal opportunity to develop on an even playing field. That outcome may not be equal because everyone is different, but equality of opportunity was emphasized. And meritocracy, that if I'm better than my neighbor, then I should get more rewards than my neighbor gets. So meritocracy is also an important part of this liberalism, which also resulted in unequal distribution because there is supposedly unequal distribution of merits. Okay, implications of liberalism. The bourgeois revolutions laid the foundation of modern nation states. because they wanted freedom from the feudal lords, from the kings, from the clergy. So, who becomes the rulers, or what is the system that will rule the society? These were called the nation states. We'll see what they are a little later. These accompanied a transition of power to the industrial commercial group. Again, we have to remember that these revolutions were not for the poverty groups. It's not that the poor therefore became liberal and equal and so on, but it was the industrial group which had emerged from the middle class that got more power. Liberalism is also criticized for substituting economic relations for traditional communal bonds. See, because now the whole relation are between individuals, not between communities or families. And the values of those relations were not the traditional values of solidarity, love, affection, and so on. Magnanimity, patience were all considered less important. Liberalism, what was most important was individualism, meritocracy, and so on. So the economic relations became more important than the values of the traditional relations. Very clearly linked to liberalism is the ideology of democracy. So, what is democracy, and did it come about only in the industrial stage? Even Plato and Aristotle, actually, they were the first thinkers who wrote about democracy. And they developed the concept of democracy, of people's rule, participatory rule, but they were also very cautious of who participates. And they said that if you keep democracy for all, then you will lose out on the wisdom, you'll lose out on the expertise of those who really know. So they developed the concept but were wary of the concept. Now, in the concept of democracy till then, for governance, of rules, the whole concept was, oh, this king is good, that king was not good, or this aristocracy is a little more humane compared to the other aristocrats. But the concept of governance was missing. Governance by people's participation was missing till then. Today, or rather at that time, democracy ideally came about as ruled by the people, implying both popular participation and government functioning in the public interest. And the basic assumptions that lied were no person was naturally superior to another. Each person enjoys equal political rights, and anyone entrusted with special powers must be accountable to the people as a whole. This kind of democracy, the ideal democracy, requires that major opportunities for the mass of ordinary people to actively participate is important. How do they convey what they want? Through discussion and autonomous organizations in shaping the agenda of public life, and when they actively use these opportunities, then only this people's participation, people's rule makes sense. We, a little later, will look at how today's democracies meet these criteria or not. Okay, but we'll hold on to that because it has taken a real long time even for these criteria to be established. Yeah, let's see, however, what happened. Even when democracies were emerging, what was happening. So if these are the ideals of democracy, is this how democracy began? Let's see what the liberalists had to say. They were ambivalent towards democracy, although they were the ones who brought democracy, because they didn't want the rule of the feudal lords and the kings and the church. But they were ambivalent towards this mass-based people's participation, because they thought that could affect. Liberals tried to restrict the exercise of political power to members of the property-owning middle class. Race and property qualifications for voting disappeared only gradually. During the second half of the 19th century, the working classes demanded and received greater political rights. This is as a result of the socialist ideology and the movements. Women could vote only in the 1920s. So this people's participation meant participation only by the property classes to start with. So liberalism itself brought about inequality to start. Okay, let us look at what is capitalism. What does it mean? It literally means, capital literally means money that is invested in order to make more money or profit. Okay, so two aspects. It has to do with money and it has to do with profit. If there's money which is just lying without growing, it is not capital, it is not capitalism. Okay, capitalism has this characteristic feature of emergence of institutions such as systems of property, laws, systems that will protect. If you buy a property, for example, if the law does not protect that you have paid and you have already signed a contract and a government which registers that now you own this property, if law does not support that, then tomorrow that property can be taken away by anyone. So capitalism required a system of law, a system of governance that will support it. And it will enable the conversion of assets of all kinds into capital. Yes, now tomorrow I want to sell this land that I purchased today because I want to do something else with that money. If I'm not allowed to sell that land, convert it into money, again, it is not capitalism. What I'm trying to say here is, capitalism is not an ideology that can just come about anywhere because I want to make more money out of the money that I have. It needs certain systems already in place for a capitalist ideology to be implemented. Now, further aspects for capitalism were brought about by Adam Smith, who in his book on the Wealth of Nations in 1776. Now, what were these ideas? We'll look at later. What we are trying to say in the slide is, again, history of capitalism, where merchants were the early capitalists. Capitalism need not be only through industrialization. Trading is also an activity which can be carried out in a capital, or is being carried out in a capitalistic way. And once historically there was more accumulation of capital through trading ventures, that production came about, that capital was used in production. And the breakthrough came about with industrialization, where capitalistic form of industrial society was developed. It's a combination of the two ideologies. Then international trade that enabled the growth of worldwide markets for the goods produced by the capitalist industries. Now, capitalism, industrialization can produce goods, but you need people to buy them, to purchase them. How does that happen? We'll look at it a little later. Now, what Adam Smith was saying in his book is the emphasis on the free market. What does that mean? He says that there should be freedom to produce what you want, and there should be freedom for people to buy what they want. There has to be freedom from both the sides, and there has to be no interruption by anyone. And this kind of balances out itself. If I want more clothes of a particular type, the industrialist will produce those kind of clothes. And the industrialist, newer items that they produce, if there's a market, then it will work. If there's no market, it will not work. But the government should not sit and decide that now this is what we will produce. Now this is what people will buy. Now this is what people will wear or people will use. That disturbs capitalistic paradigm of free market. Okay, so those aspects are emphasized by Adam Smith in his book, that prices also will be automatically balanced, because if it is too expensive, people are not going to buy. So the industries will know what price to keep. Again, government should not interfere on how to price. And the incentive there should be there for people to buy more and more. only then there will be more and more production, and therefore there will be more and more capitalistic accumulation, wealth accumulation. Okay, so what were the values here? Free operation of supply and demand, self-interest, and here individualism comes into play. If I have the choice of doing what I like, that is very important for my consumption habits. I want to buy this dress, I don't want to buy that. So that self-interest becomes a value in capitalism, and competition. So if this particular industrialist is producing my requirements better than the other one, then I'm going to go to the better one. I'm not going to go to the one which has lower quality. So it is competition that is again very important. So liberalism, democracy, capitalism, and start with rationalism that had led to development of science and technology, had to be followed by industrialization. It all converges into this whole industrial mode of production that came about. Okay, we have studied this in our textbooks in school also, how the steam engine was kind of the beginning of technology, the turning point, and necessary for industrialization. Okay, so industrialization developed as an economic system. And what were the different characteristics? Large scale production. We already had cottage industries where we would produce, for example, just one carpet at a time. The weavers may weave just one carpet at a time. This whole thing of mass scale production came about through industrialization. You'll have to enlarge it here. So large scale production, accumulation of capital, and relentless growth were important aspects of industrialization. If there is no growth, it's a bad industry. Okay. As a philosophy, we can see it is dedicated to materialism, absolute faith in science, and a worship of technology. Okay, spread of industrialization, we can see how it spread all over the world, although started in England. First, most directly took place in British colonies of North America, Australia, and New Zealand, not Asia and Africa. Second spread was from Western Europe to Eastern Europe, and from Northern Europe to Southern Europe. And the third spread was from Europe to the colonies in Latin America, Africa, and Asia. Okay, now let's see the implications of industrialization with reference to infrastructural development, class stratification and exploitation, and individualism. Okay, we'll basically focus on the last two. Class stratification and exploitation. This whole system of upper class, middle class, lower class developed as a result of industrialization. And one of this could appropriate the labor of another owing to the different places they occupy in the economic system. This very clear hierarchy emerged. It also resulted in understanding physical labor as participating in production and mental labor as enjoying its fruits. The status in the class stratification was supposed to be based on individual merit. As I said earlier, everyone has a freedom to do what they like. But does the laborer have a freedom to become the capitalist? That is the hidden inequality in this industrial system. That it is a competitive world based on merits, so everyone can try, but it really doesn't happen in practice because the majority are already deprived of the means of production and therefore also of the fruits of production. Other implications of industrialization is manufacturing went out of the home. Earlier we know cottage industries were being handled by the whole family at homes. Now there are different settings for industries. Factories came up. The conditions of people in which they lived, the working conditions were harsh and living conditions followed also being harsh. The wages were low. They were purposely kept low so to keep them working. If the wages were adequate, the fear was that they will stop coming regularly because they are comfortable. As opposed to slaves and serfs, laborers were formally free and yet fully dependent on the capitalist economically. According to Karl Marx, the capitalist relations of production were as exploitative as the feudal ones, but the liberal ideas of individuality and merits had the effect of concealing this fact. Individualism as an outcome of industrialization. Um, Individualism became essential for economic growth, social values being considered secondary to the creation of satisfaction of wants. Wants was very important for people to buy things, okay, and that wants came about through individualism. It's a political and social ideology that places high value on the self-directed, self-contained, and comparatively unrestrained individual or ego, and its unlimited pursuit of pleasure is considered the ultimate right of every person, but ultimately transforming selfishness into a universal virtue, so that there is more demand for industrial products and so that the industrialists can accumulate more wealth. So we need to see the links between these ideologies. Okay, so we come to the end of this particular module today. And what have we studied today? We looked at the ideologies starting with rationalism, how it replaced religion as a source of knowledge, how it led to technology, but at the same time how the non-Western traditions were excluded from, they were not considered as creating valid knowledge. Liberalism is what we discuss as the most important ideological force of the Western world till today, which comprises of individualism, freedom, rationalism, equality of opportunities, and meritocracy. We saw how liberalism and democracy have led to the foundation of nation states, which we will see in detail in the next class, and how democracy emerged with values of equality, like no person was naturally superior to another, and everyone enjoyed equal political rights, and the system was accountable to the people. Capitalism we discussed as investment of money to make more profit, but through free operation of supply and demand, self-interest and competition. Finally, we saw how industrialization is characterized by large-scale production, accumulation of capital, and relentless growth, leading to class stratification, exploitation, social mobility, and a whole lot of other social implications. Thank you, and I hope you have again followed the story and seen how history has led us to where we are today, more or less in terms of industrialization. And yes, do read up more on concepts that are not very clear, and I wish you all the best.